Okay, I'm Daniel Winkler, Master Bladesmith, also owner of Winkler Knives. Yes, I did start making knives in 1975, and the direction that we went with it was 18th century styling. So we did knives and hatchets in the style of the time period of the movie. The way that all came about is the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association was having their Southeastern Rendezvous, which is a gathering, a shooting match, and a gathering of like-minded people portraying 18th century life in the Boone area. And I was set up selling knives and hatchets at that show, and a group came in that were doing casting for background characters for Last of the Mohicans. And so learning about that, I did some research and found that they were doing the filming in the Asheville area primarily, is where the offices were. So we had a craft show on the Biltmore estate not long after that casting call at the Rendezvous. And so while we were in town, we looked up the offices for Ford Pass, who was the production company doing the film. Contacted them. They put me in touch with Ron Downing, the props master, and that evening he had a meeting with director Michael Mann. We had a group of knives like these with us to sell at the show. He said, "Can you please bring those with you? And I'd like to introduce you to Michael," which he did. And from that point, we worked directly with Ron Downing and Michael Mann and a few of their other people in the props department, developing and designing and making knives and tomahawks for the principal characters and secondary characters in the movie. Okay, so we set up the meeting with Michael Mann, and they would give us direction on what they wanted to see. And the knife style, the blade shape, they might have a picture or a sketch or an actual artifact that we were to use as a guide to go by. I would go back to my home forge here in Blowing Rock at the time and make what they wanted and take it the next week to the next production meeting. And for about 6 to 8 weeks, we had a weekly production meeting with Michael Mann and Ron Downing, and they would look at what we had done. They would either say, "Okay, that's good for this character," or they'd say, "Okay, let's change this and make another one." And so we made multiple changes as we did the development over this 6 to 8 week period, and when the filming actually started, we were at the point where they were comfortable with what the principals were carrying. All the knives that we made up to that point went to secondary characters because they were all unique and different and might not have real stage presence, so the similarities wouldn't have been caught by the viewers. But so we worked directly with them, and then later, as filming went on, we were invited to go on location and just be there as they were using these pieces and make sure everything did well. One of the most interesting parts about it, when they finally settled on like a knife for Daniel Day-Lewis or the hatchet for Wes Studi, they would have me make 3 as close to identical pieces as I could. That way they had one for the character to use on a daily basis. They had a second backup, so if Daniel Day-Lewis was hanging off the side of that canoe in the lake at the fort and he dropped his knife, well, everybody would have to stop for a week while I made another one, so they had a backup piece. And then we made one that we didn't sharpen that was sent to special effects that they molded and made plastic models, rubber handles with the bladders in them, or whatever they needed for the special effects. And so on all the principal stuff, we did 3 identical, or as close to identical as we could, pieces for them. Well, we made an actual sharp, highly functional knife. The 2 pieces, the daily use one and the backup, were totally functional, to the point where Daniel Day-Lewis got so much into his character. In the evenings, he would stay in character and use his knife to cut his meat and spear it to eat with. And that knife, if you watch in the film, it actually does get used in something that is not a fight scene, where he was like cutting the patch on when he was loading his rifle, maybe a few other things where he did actually use the functional knife in its actual capacity. Now, in the action sequences, of course, they probably would have switched to one of the props so nobody got hurt, because they were sharp and they were very, very lethal should you not use care with using them. Well, my specialty at that time, and to a certain degree still is in a very limited capacity, is doing not total reproduction of 18th century cutlery, but highly influenced designs. Now, I have done some reproduction work for museums and such, where I've taken a piece that was an actual museum artifact and replicated it as closely as possible. In this film, what we did was Michael and Ron would find originals in museums. For example, Magwa's tomahawk, the one in the picture up here, that came from Fort Meigs up near, I believe it's near Toledo, but I'm not certain about that, but I believe. And so what they did is they borrowed that original tomahawk and sent it to me to do a very close replica of. And the only thing they changed, they wanted the handle longer because it was a fairly small tomahawk, but they wanted it enlarged for screen presence. And so I actually copied an original as closely as possible in a slightly larger size for that particular piece, for that character. Now, on Daniel Day-Lewis's knife, the one he uses in the film, what they did is they took pictures of a blade shape that was at Fort Niagara in their museum. And so what I did is I used that influence to develop the knife with the deer bone handle with that blade shape. So it wasn't an actual copy of an original piece, it was an influenced design using design aspects from the original. And we did that also on some of the other pieces that we did. Mark Schewing that played Uncas, his knife was also an influenced design. Basically, the blade shape on it was taken from a trade knife that was pretty common in that era, and then again we used a bone handle and some brain tan deerskin wrapping on the handle to give it a unique look. Everything that we made was completely authentic in materials, design, and construction to what would have been available in the 18th century. Michael Mann was a stickler for authenticity in all the props and costuming for the principal characters in the second. Anybody that got close to the camera, everything they had was meticulously detailed for authenticity. Yeah, well, being part of the film Last of the Mohicans has been a significant influence in the success of our knife business. It catapulted our name out there to a lot of people we would not have had exposure to otherwise. And still today, and that was back in '92, that was a long time ago, I have yet to go to any kind of knife show or trade show where I don't get into a discussion about Last of the Mohicans. It's one of those films like Gone with the Wind, it never stops. It's always on TV, it's always replaying, and people are constantly interested in it, and it doesn't wane, it doesn't stop. So from that film, which was the first type of film work that we had ever done, and we got into that kind of through luck and having the right style and knowledge of this era, which worked out very well for us and them too. From that, it led into a little bit more work in films. Soon after Mohicans was completed, we were called to do some knives for a Jodie Foster, Richard Gere movie called Summersby. They weren't real prominent in the film, although we were there and we did that. After that, I think some of the secondary character pieces from Mohicans was sold to a production, Ted Turner production, I think, was done with Geronimo. And some of our pieces went into that. Although I didn't have any direct contact with them, I was told, hey, your stuff has been sold to this production. So apparently some things got shifted around. After that, we didn't do any movie work for many years. We just, I don't know if as we lost contact with the people that we had worked with through the props department and the producers, or if it just wasn't any call for the era that we were proficient in. So then once I got into a more production-oriented business and started working heavily with the U.S. military, then we got back into a couple more calls to do some work for some films. Zero Dark 30 is one that we had pieces in, and more recently Suicide Squad, which was a Marvel Comics, I think it's Marvel, yeah, comics movie that where we outfitted the military element that was in that film. Colonel Flagg's dagger that he carries on the front of his tactical vest is this one. This is the one that he actually carried in the movie. This is the same dagger, but this one happens to be a plastic prop that they used again in action sequences where we made the originals, and they were all very functional, and then they did the molding to have action copies that would be non-lethal. Same thing, there were hatchets, combat hacks that we made for them. Again, the real one and the prop. So they're, again, very meticulous in making sure everything looked right in the film and there wasn't any lack of authenticity. And so it seems that we get called in when authenticity for a particular design, a material, or a time period is necessary. Then we get called in because of our experience in the real world. Well, the overall experience of working with a major motion picture like Last of the Mohicans was really unique and fascinating to see the kind of backup that has to go on for a 30-second clip of two people out in the woods was just absolutely fascinating. It's the 2-hour movie is made up of just so many 5 to 10 second film clips. And then when you put it all together in the proper way and it flows, you see this really works. And seeing how all that came about was fascinating. And I'll be honest with you, the first 3 times I watched the movie, I didn't follow the storyline at all. All I did was look at, oh, I know that prop, or I made that knife, or oh, we were there on location. I remember right behind there was a caterer's table with donuts on it, and it took a little while. And then once I got over the, I guess, starstruck watching of the film, I realized it was a beautiful storyline that flowed very well from beginning to end, and I was really proud to be a part of that.